We're going to look at a couple of proofs here, and we're also going to go on to introduce a handful of what we call derived rules that they won't be a burden. On the contrary, what they'll do is they'll speed up proofs. But let's start with this. This is a theorem. It doesn't have any premises. It says that if P is true, then not P arrow Q is true. Seems a little odd, but if you think about it, it should be right. Suppose P is true. Well then, the antecedent of this conditional would be false, and it would be true. So this should be a theorem, even though it's not very intuitive, and the proof isn't hard. Let's take a look. We assume P. We don't have any premises, so we indent, and we assume P, and that gives us our new goal. Our new goal is to get to not P arrow Q. You look at the goal, you say, what am I trying to prove? What does that suggest about what I should do? Well, it's a conditional. So you start a new subproof. You indent again. Yes, you do have to indent again. Each time you make an assumption, it calls for its own indent. And now our goal is to get to Q. Now this is where things might momentarily seem a little bit strange, because you look around and you see that you've got P and not P, but you don't have anything remotely having to do with Q. But if you remember some things we've talked about in class, or if you think about it for a second, you may see a way that we can get this Q into the proof. So all you need to do is this. Start with P, add Q on. Now, because we've also got not P, we can get Q. This goes along with the idea, and this will be important later on, that from two things that contradict one another, you can derive anything. So we got from not P to Q. Our assumption of not P led us to Q, so this subproof is complete. We put in the scope line, makes this stuff unavailable. And now we have not P arrow Q. That was our original goal. That was what we made our first assumption to try to derive. We've derived it, so the proof is complete. So this is a somewhat odd theorem. It's also a theorem with a point. It sort of reminds us when the antecedent of a conditional is false, the conditional is true. That's what really underlies this theorem. Carrying on then. Here's another theorem to prove. It doesn't seem so unintuitive, but it brings up some points about proof strategy. So we've got this rather complicated looking conditional as a premise. We want to prove this more straightforward conditional as our conclusion. Because we're trying to prove a conditional, we make an assumption for conditional proof. That's what you do unless you see some other way to go. And for the moment, we don't really have much in the way of other methods. So we've assumed P. Our goal is Q arrow R. Our new goal is a conditional. So, as usual, we do a conditional proof. We indent again, and we assume Q, set R as our goal. But now you might feel stuck for a moment, because the problem is we've got to find a way to extract information from here. We obviously can't do a modus tollens, but it's almost as obvious that we can't do a modus ponens. We don't have P arrow Q. Well, there's a good strategic hint that we've talked about before. If you can't extract information from anything and you've got a conditional, ask yourself, can I prove the conditional's antecedent? Can I derive that? If I can do the modus ponens, and this would help here. If I had P arrow Q, I'd get P arrow R. If I had P arrow R, then in one step, using P, I'd get R, and so everything would work out. So I want to try to prove P arrow Q, but now the proof is going to start to look awkward. Because I'm trying to prove a conditional, the only way I've been given to do that is to assume its antecedent. You say, this is odd. I mean, why assume the antecedent? Well, you're absolutely right that it's redundant. It doesn't serve any function. But the way that we've written our proof rules calls for assuming the antecedent if you want to prove a conditional. We could have written them in another way. That would have made things more awkward. But we'll have a derived rule soon enough that will mean that we normally will be able to avoid this kind of thing. So we're trying to prove P arrow Q for strategic reasons, because we want to use a modus ponens. All we need to do is get to Q, and it's obvious how we do that. We use the rule of repetition. There are other ways we could have done it, but there'd be no advantage. Just use the rule of repetition. We've gotten from P to Q utterly trivially. So we've proved P arrow Q. Now we can go ahead and use it. We've got P arrow Q. By modus ponens, we can get P arrow R. Now that we've got P arrow R, we can go back here and use P, and we can get R itself, which was the most recent goal that we have to deal with. This goal has already been taken care of. The stuff's behind scope lines. So we go back to the most recent previous goal. That was to get R. We've got it. We got from Q to R. That means we've proved Q arrow R. Our first goal was to get from P to Q arrow R, and we've done that. So the proof is complete. If P, then if Q, then R follows from this conditional. The most important thing about this proof here was that sometimes you need to think strategically. If you can't use an information extracting rule, you can sometimes create an opportunity for one, especially, it turns out, often enough, by getting the antecedent, by deriving the antecedent of a conditional. And that's what we did here. Okay, well, there are some awkward things about this proof and some odd things about the first one. We're going to now talk about a handful of derived rules. By derived rules, I mean we show by using our proof procedures that we could always do without them. We could always go through the derivation, but we just introduce them as extra rules that speed things up. Each of these proofs is easy to complete. It'd be dead easy to prove P arrow Q from Q. You just assume P and then repeat Q and you'd have it. We've already seen something very similar to this. So not P, how can we prove P arrow Q? Well, you've got not P as a premise, assume P to get Q, then you've got not P on one line, P on the other. Do the addition trick from the first proof and do the disjunctive syllogism. That's obvious. This would be easy to prove. P if and only if Q implies P arrow Q by the rule BD. Once we add P to the mix, we get Q by modus ponens. And if you think about it, it's pretty obvious. We could also have gone from Q to P. It would have worked in either direction. Similarly here, P if and only if Q, well, from that Q arrow P follows by the rule BD. If we've got not P, then a modus tollens step would get us not Q. And you can also see here, if instead we'd had not Q here, the same kind of reasoning would get us to not P. So all of these are straightforward things. Straightforward, these two, in the sense that given how our arrow works, these are straightforward. I'm not saying they're intuitively obvious. I'm saying that within our proof system they're straightforward. They come up a lot. And so what we're going to do is we're going to turn these into derived rules. The first rule is arrow plus, and it comes in two forms. If you've got Q, you can take it as the consequent of any conditional whatever. You can put anything you like here. I've used a sentence letter, but it could be anything. From Q, P arrow Q, or whatever you like arrow Q, follows. From not P, P arrow Q also follows. Think about it. If Q is true, then our conditional has a true consequent. Truth table says it would be true. If P is false, then our conditional has a false antecedent. Once again, truth table says it should be true. So these should be correct rules, and we've shown that our proof system lets you derive them. These are even more straightforward. The reason for introducing these is simply that they speed proofs up. So if we go back, we can see that in this proof, what we had to do to get P arrow Q was go through this kind of pointless subproof. With the rule arrow plus, we could simply have written P arrow Q on line 4 using the rule arrow plus. This kind of thing comes up often. You don't have to use these rules, but they save you a lot of time. Think about them functionally. Think about them in terms of what they do, and I think you'll see that they're worth having.